Welcome back to the channel. I'm Colin, and this video is going to be a review on the Punch Audio Portazo. Apparently, Portazo means lamb in Spanish. The Portazo is a one dynamic driver and two planar driver set that is tuned and targeted towards bass heads. The Portazo has a plus 15 decibel sub-bass boost. So if you're a neutral head, this probably isn't a set for you. But the Portazo isn't your conventional bass head IEM as well, as I feel it is more of an all-rounder with a boosted sub-bass. Here are the specs of the Portazo, and we'll talk more about the sound after we unbox the IEMs. Let's check out the unboxing of the Portazo. Sliding out the outer box, there's a gatefold opening in the inner box. Here's the IEMs themselves. Then there's the zippered case, with all the accessories stored inside. There are two sets of tips, a set of silicone tips, and a set of foam tips for the bassiest response. There are also 4 spare mesh filters. Then we have the modular plug, and 2 sets of end plugs. And here we have everything that's included. Let's look at the build of the Portazo. The IEMs have an all-plastic shell. They feel very light on my hands. There's a resin poured green faceplate on the Portazo. The nozzle has quite an interesting design on the Portazo. It looks slightly odd and stubby compared to other IEMs I've tried. It's also on the shorter side. I personally preferred using the SpinFit W1 tips due to the longer stem length as opposed to the shorter stock tips. I think the W1 tips help compensate for the shorter nozzle. With the W1 tips, I find the Portazo very comfy. It's lightweight, isolation is very good, and there isn't any driver flex. With the stock silicone tips, I find it difficult to achieve a good seal in my ears. The modular cable looks and feels pretty good. There's a consistent design language throughout all the connectors and plugs of the cable. With a black and silver look, the cable has OFC conductors and it comes with a balanced and single-ended plug. So here are the measurements of the Portazo, measured on my Clone 711 coupler. First, let's look at the sub-bass. The marketing material states a plus 15 decibel sub-bass boost, but according to the measurements, they're slightly less, maybe around a plus 13 decibel boost. Most IEMs slopes or flattens around the 80 Hz region, but the slope of the Portazo is really linear to create the sub-bass boost. And the lower mid-range area is slightly scooped, creating a slightly recessed mid-range. The upper mid-range is quite subtle when you compare it to the bass region, and it slopes down quite quick at the 4 to 6K region. You can see that there is not a lot of peakiness in the treble region. It's smooth and tamed. That is also reflected in the sound of the IEMs. The 10K and above region doesn't really roll off much, as the Portazo was tuned to measure all the way to 35 kHz. When I first heard the Portazo, before I'd seen any measurements of the IEMs, I was slightly underwhelmed by how light it sounded. I knew it was a bass head IEM, so I was expecting a huge bass and mid-bass boost, but instead, what I heard was a pretty neutral U-shaped sound. After some more listening, I started to find the bass boost I was looking for in EDM and hip-hop songs. I found out that the bass boost was mainly in the sub-bass, and the mid-bass boost was actually relatively mild. My initial listen consisted of classic rock and vocal-oriented pop. There just wasn't a lot of sub-bass boost to begin with, so the bass boost didn't have much of an effect in those genres. But once you listen to stuff like Daft Punk and Hans Zimmer, you really notice the sub-bass boost in the Portazo. The sub-bass of the Portazo is actually really fast and snappy. The sub-bass lambs, but it also goes away very quickly. In hip-hop and EDM stuff, it doesn't really rumble, but adds a deep thump to the sound. So the overall cleanliness of the sound is very well maintained despite the bass boost. For the mid-bass, I think the Portazo actually sounds relatively linear. It doesn't sound bassy at all. I definitely wouldn't consider them very mid-bass heavy. The mid-bass sounds clean and snappy, It doesn't hit very deep as well. I would have preferred slightly more mid-bass impact. Vocals and mid-range sound slightly recessed, but the tonality sounds very neutral to me. I don't hear a lot of coloration. There's an occasional emphasis in vocals in the treble region. That can make the vocals sound edgy and slightly unnatural sometimes in the portazo. But vocals in general don't sound shrill or bright to me. Still sounds relatively neutral with a little bit of edginess. The treble sounds generally very well controlled. Other than the occasional edginess I mentioned, the portazo sounds pretty smooth but detailed in the treble region. You can get the resolution from planar drivers in the treble, but without the harshness in it which is often associated with being resolving. I think the soundstage size of the portazo is really spacious. It sounds decently wide, but the soundstage depth is really quite good. It may be related to the slight recess in vocals. There is a good sensation of distance between further and closer instruments and vocals in the portazo. Overall, as you can expect from a well-tuned planar tweeter, the soundstage of the portazo feels realistic and natural. Imaging is also pretty good in the portazo. Instruments have a good spatial presentation and good separation between them. It's really nicely done for an IEM at this price. For the comparison, I really wanted to compare the portazo to the SPA high-end Max, as they actually measure very similarly except in the sub-bass region, where the bass boost is in the portazo. What I find interesting is that when listening to older rock stuff like Jimi Hendrix and Eagles, etc., the SPA high-end Max sounds bassier and punchier, as there is almost no sub-bass in these old recordings. But when you listen to modern hip-hop and EDM stuff, like Frank Ocean and Daft Punk, you then really hear the impact in the portazo. I think it really does add to those songs, giving you a very deep thud without sounding boomy or muddy. For the rest of the frequency range, I think the portazo sounds a little more laid back. Everything is presented in a smoother and more natural way and sounds a little less vibrant and dynamic. But the soundstage presentation of the portazo is larger and more precise. While for the SPA, everything sounds more in your face. Background instruments sound a little more forward and pop out a little more. The treble is also more peaky on the SPA, and you can hear the snares and electric guitars pop out a little more. Then I compared the portazo to the Kiwi Ears Septet. Comparing these two that have a very different frequency response, it's apparent that portazo has a punchier response, even in the mid-bass region. In comparison, the Septet sounds brighter, more neutral and airier. You hear better detail retrieval in the mid-range and treble region in the Septet, and the soundstage is more open and larger. Overall, these are two very different sounding IEMs. The portazo sounds very nice in EDM stuff, and for the Septet, I prefer more acoustic songs with it. But what's similar for the two IEMs is that I think they both have very good soundstage and imaging for their price categories. There's also a difference in the tonality of the mid-range. Though the Septet sounds airier in general, there is a warmth in the mid-range region, possibly due to the lift in the 300 to 500 Hz region, while the portazo sounds relatively neutral. I couldn't hear any coloration in the mid-range of the portazo. The portazo isn't perfect, and here are some cons that I discovered when testing these. First, the nozzle is on the shorter side. I would personally prefer a longer nozzle to achieve a deeper fit with the portazo. Second, the bass boost effect doesn't cover a wide range of tracks. As we've seen in the measurements, the bass shelf of the portazo is very steep. So in tracks that aren't as sub-bass heavy, you won't really notice the bass boost. To be honest, this is more of a trade-off than a con though. In summary, I think the portazo is a really well thought out and a really well tuned IEM. Though it's primarily tuned to be a basshead IEM, it's not just about the bass. It actually still maintains very good fidelity and resolution throughout the entire frequency range, along with very respectable soundstage and imaging capability. The carefully tuned sub-bass boost in the portazo allows it to be more of an all-rounded IEM than just a basshead IEM. It's an IEM that you can enjoy deep and satisfying sub-bass without compromising too much in other regions. I think you really need to understand what kind of songs you listen to. or you might be disappointed with the bass response. So if you're someone that listens to a lot of hip-hop, EDM, or soundtracks, and you're looking for a bass-oriented IEM that's capable of providing you with good technicality in other areas, give the Portazo a try. It's different from other Basshead IEMs that tend to create a bass bloat and muddy up the sound. So this is the end of my review of the Portazo. Let me know if you have any questions about the Portazo in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.